Christ Our King Community Church. Welcome to another episode of Kingdom Thinking, where we connect Jesus' story to real-time stories. Today, we're going to continue our study of the book of the Color Compromise, looking at chapter 9, which takes us to the time period of 1960s through the 1980s. In particular, chapter 9 talks about a political movement that was started that really aligned evangelicals with a particular political party. That political party is known as the religious right. Now, what happens in the 1960s, as Jamar Tisby, the author of The Color Compromise, writes, he says that Christian complicity and racism has become more difficult to discern. This is since about the 1970s, he says. Christians' complicity and racism has become more difficult to discern. It is hidden, but that does not mean it no longer exists. So a few things in chapter 9 that I thought was worth highlighting. One is that the religious right was formed to fight against liberal politics. Now, when we say liberal politics, the liberal politics at the time was this idea of integration. At the time, it seemed to be very liberal to integrate school systems, to have white kids and black kids in the same school building. So much so, there was a movement to where the public school systems that were formerly filled with white children, as schools became integrated, there's a rise of private Christian schools. Yes, Christian schools that were formed so that white people didn't have to go to school with black people. And so these Christian schools became segregated schools where only white kids were able to go. And so you have this movement that was done by religious right. So those who valued segregation, those who valued this idea that God was for the separation of the races. Jamar Tisby says in his book here, he quotes a Baptist preacher that says, "What are we doing as Christians while this awful thing called integration that should be called communism is destroying our way of life and our entire race?" Tisby goes on to say that furthermore, Christian conservatives carefully coded any change, especially those related to race, as being liberal. And they perceive themselves as constantly under attack by liberal operatives in the media and politics. By the way, I'm talking about the 1970s, not 2020, although that language sounds very familiar to what we heard in our last political cycle. So what Tisby is showing us is that for a long time, there has been opposition to racial equality in America. And that opposition, unfortunately, came not only from the secular world, but from the church. The church has aligned with this coded message of resisting what they would consider a liberal turn in the national social political life and to return America to traditional values. Those traditional values were that white people and black people are to be separated. Now, since the 1960s or so, it's been deemed, socially unacceptable to use derogatory terms or to be a blatant racist. And so this language has become coded. It's become coded to where you hear things such as forced busing. You hear things such as war on drugs. You hear things with these terminologies to where everyone knows what you're talking about. We know that you're talking about harming black people, but you don't say black people. You keep it abstract. You say things like states' rights. You say it so that you can be colorblind. You can self-identify as being colorblind, yet vote and support certain political ideologies that will hinder the equality of black people. And Christians were right in line with this, unfortunately. Unfortunately, there was Christians, particularly the political party, the political group known as the religious right, the political movement known as the religious right, that was mixed in this. So I want us to understand that we don't want to mix American values and kingdom values. American values have traditionally been that white is right, everything else is wrong. That's an American value. That's not a kingdom value. Kingdom values of justice and righteousness should determine the way in which we engage the society around us. American values are about comfort. Kingdom values are about submission and thinking about the other person is greater than yourself. So let's not hide behind myths, or as I would say, let's not be one verse Christians. We take one verse to apply to what we want to believe or we want to think. You may want to take one verse and say, well, because there's one verse, I don't have to like this type of people. Kingdom values tell us justice and righteousness are things that God seeks to give all of mankind. Now, chapter 9 again talks about religious right and the political movement, but I want us to caution against division among Christians, specifically around political views. Maybe learn to listen to one another. Maybe learn to learn from one another, and then may we unite so that we can build God's kingdom, not America's kingdom. Regardless of our political affiliation, may we seek justice and righteousness, and may we align on those things. And may we get rid of the idolatry of nationalism, and may we seek the kingdom. And if we do that, we won't see things like we saw that in the 20th century, where there was a rise of a political movement that closely tied theology and racism together. We can avoid such things if our end goal is justice and righteousness. And furthermore, that we give our hearts, our minds, our souls, our spirits to loving others as God has called us to love one another. So chapter 9, titled Organizing the Religious Right at the End of the 20th Century, humbles us and shows us how whenever we incorrectly tie our own cultural values to political values, sometimes we can miss kingdom values. May we be kingdom-minded in the way in which we engage in the social political sphere. Even now, outside of election season, may we continue to put first the kingdom of God, his righteousness, in the way in which we engage our social political lives. Kingdom Thinking, chapter 9. We will continue in the book next time with chapter 10. Chapter 10, Considering Racial Reconciliation in the Age of Black Lives Matter. Y'all have a blessed and wonderful day.